Welcome to the Bookman's Corner. I'm your host, Lois Lindstrom. We have an award-winning author who is a major author of books and articles related to health issues. Our guest author is Martha Rosenberg, who traveled here from Chicago to discuss her book, Big Food, Big Pharma, Big Lies. This book is a major exposé of the dangers within the pharmaceutical and agricultural industries in America. Included in your book are more than 20 interviews with doctors, researchers, and experts who came forward to tell all to investigative reporter Martha Rosenberg. Also, Martha cites the opioid crisis with more than 500,000 deaths in the United States from prescription and illicit opioids between 1999 and 2020. She also discusses cloned meat, and she mentions why Europeans don't eat American meat because the EU refuses U.S. hormone-grown beef. Welcome to the show. Martha, since the first edition of your book, Big Food, Big Pharma, Big Lies, in 2012, food and drug risks have only increased thanks to deceptive marketing and high-level conflicts of interest. And your book was updated and reprinted in 2023. Are the federal government agencies that are charged with protecting the consumer still putting industry profits ahead of public health?
I feel like the agencies of our government still are captured, big word, by industry.
They are.
I feel they are the pharmaceutical industry and also the drug, big agriculture and meat producers. I feel in both cases the consumer and the user do not come first.
That's pretty sad. Briefly, how did the 2020 pandemic affect public health?
The immediate effect it had, Lois, was isolation.
Isolation?
People left their jobs, stayed at home, they didn't go to school, they were just isolated at home. And I think that what that does to people, what it did then and what it does now, is it makes them depressed.
Okay.
So people became very depressed. They also ate too much. People became obese. I shouldn't say that, but it's true. People
drank too much?
drank too much alcohol. And I think people began taking antidepressants. You're not depressed because you have a chemical imbalance. You're depressed because you've been isolated for a year. Mm-hmm. But it had a very negative effect on the public health.
You wrote that years before the debut of Prozac in 1988, one of the top-selling drug categories was depression drugs. And unlike Valium and Librium, which were taken when needed, the new antidepressants were taken daily for years. And yet we learned that when the results were in, it wasn't working. Why?
Well, first I'd like to go back to the marketing angle. What Big Pharma did was recast anxiety in a bad day, which would be depression for a day, and they recast it as depression. So they would say you're not really sad or anxious because you're going to the dentist, you're getting on a flight, you have a chemical imbalance known as depression. That theory of chemical imbalance of neurotransmitters has been disproven, but people don't remember that, and people believed it. And from the standpoint of drug makers, they went from we call PRN, as needed drug, mm-hmm. like benzodiazepine, Valium or Librium. They went from that to a everyday chronic drug, which people now take for decades.
And this is very harmful to their health overall, isn't it?
It's very difficult to get off these drugs.
It's difficult to get off these
yes.
drugs. You're addicted to them, right?
Well, the drug makers try to avoid the word addicted, mm-hmm. but they are addicted. They call it discontinuation syndromes. It's addicted, right, it's addicted. And one thing that was not publicized when these drugs were first marketed is they leach the calcium out of the body, and people are prone to fractures and bone breakage.
Bone breakage because of, oh wow, that's incredible. Well, you wrote that one night in 1977, as Americans sat on their couches and watched a TV episode of Touched by an Angel, they saw an ad for a prescription allergy pill called Claritin. With that breakthrough, tell us what other drugs were quickly advertised and how many dollars are spent annually on TV ads.
The original drugs that were advertised in 1998 when direct-to-consumer advertising began, which we call DTC, One was Claritin, and truthfully, I don't remember a lot of them now because it's been so long.
Sure.
But I will say that drug makers spend $5 billion a year now.
$5 billion a year
on the DTC advertising, and I've recently read that they make back that from their ads in consumer paying or insurance paying 5 times that.
Whoa. Whoa. And to follow up on the status of drug ads on TV, I read that Senators Bernie Sanders, who's an independent from Vermont, and Angus King, an independent from Maine, have introduced a bill called the End Prescription Drug Act now. I mean, what's wrong with these DTC ads and of drugs to consumer ads on TV?
There's many things wrong with them, Lois. It's kind of my mission to highlight what's wrong with them. The first thing is the expense of the drugs themselves, because
the cost
of the drugs, because the nature of DTC advertising is they will advertise a brand name drug, not a generic, and of course the brand names are expensive until they go. So first there's the expense question. Then there's the fact that they create hypochondriacs. A lot of these ads will say, you know, you might be at risk or you might be suffering from silent diseases, and they create fear in people, and then people go to their physicians and they say, well, am I suffering from, and then there's also a market in screening. Well, we'll screen you, we'll see if you have this. And so perfectly healthy people are turned into hypochondriacs. And so the DTC advertising has changed the whole landscape of drug sales. Many pharma companies no longer need reps because the person who's watching the TV will go to the doctor and say,
I need this drug, right?
Yeah, I have this condition, I need this drug. I know because I watch TV.
That's right, that's right. I know I've got this condition, that's right. Well, I learned something new from your book. I never knew that prescription drugs kill more people in America each year than traffic accidents. I mean, do you think people know that fact, and why is that happening?
I think the side effects of these pharmaceutical drugs that are advertised and expensive are not widely known. If you think of how do we learn what we learn? Through news media. News media is captured by its ads. Its ads are all ask your doctor. They're not going to say this well-selling drug is killing people. They're not going to say it. And so I think that there's very little publicity of the danger of the drugs. And well, here's a one that we don't hear often. It's a non-prescription drug, which is your Tylenol. And it really is highly correlated with liver problems and anaphylaxis.
Yes. And just recently I've just read some articles about this. And,
right.
But people have been using that for years, might have some big problems, right?
Well, there are generally one thing. I'm cynical, Lois, because I am a reporter on drugs, and what happens a lot in our field here is if a poor soul dies from a drug, they will get a settlement from the drug makers who build the settlements into their price, and they will get a gag order. So in other words, you can have $5 million if you never talk about the fact that we killed your son.
Wow. They
really do.
Wow. And it could be drugs over many categories, right?
The gag orders they keep this stuff quiet.
They keep it quiet.
You asked, why do we hear so little about the harm? It's the gag orders.
Wow, the gag orders. And how can that be changed? I mean, where is the open up the information to people?
Well, that's
public awareness.
No, that's a good question. I would like to see more people say, no, I don't want the money. I want a platform to tell people how bad your drug is, and they killed, my son. I would like to see that happen. I don't know if it will, but I think public outrage will help.
Now, how is Big Pharma finding huge profits by prescribing drugs for our youngest children? Like why are parents giving their 1-year-olds acid reflux medication and their 3-year-olds bipolar medications? I found that reading your book, and I was shocked.
Well, Lois, the pathologizing of our young people is criminal.
It is.
And some of it, of course, is your psychoactive drugs for alleged ADHD and all that. But The GERD medicines, which are acid reflux, literally people give them to babies who used to just spit up. A baby spits up.
Yes, that's right.
And so what pharma has done is it's pathologized normal behavior. I'm not the first person to say this, but little boys who are just wild, they don't want to sit in a chair and learn ABCs, are now called ADHD.
Yes.
And the reason that pharma's been able to do this is because there is no blood or brain test for, so it's a judgment diagnosis.
And so many little boys get on Ritalin at a young age, right? Because they're not sitting properly in the classroom, right?
And they've pathologized these young kids with normal, when I was growing up, you're a normal kid.
Yeah.
You know, you had a bad day, you don't have depression, you don't have bipolar, you don't have ADHD, you're not on the spectrum. The spectrum thing, that is very complicated because there are more kids with problems, but the answer is not pharmaceutical drugs, and they're cashing in on pathologizing our young people.
Yes, yes, it's really sad. It's really sad. Now, and also, how did menopause become a disease and hormonal replacement the cure? There was an interesting chapter in your book about that. That was amazing.
In the history of drug makers in the U.S., probably few things were as lucrative as hormone replacement therapy. They called it HRT. Beginning in the 1940s, it was almost a rite of passage for women as they became older.
Yes.
They called older like late 40s, but it was very, very lucrative to Big Pharma, and many celebrities would pathologize what is just normal aging.
Yes.
And what began to happen is the side effects of those drugs surfaced, and they found those hormones caused stroke, cancer, heart attacks, dementia. They had many, many side effects which were not documented.
Oh my gosh.
But what's happened, Lois, that bothers me as a reporter is that people don't remember this because we have a new generation of women now.
Yeah.
And so consequently, we see these drugs coming back, marketed.
Again. And of course, breast cancer rates really rose dramatically because of the HRT, right?
They did. It was
like 26% or something?
26%, and these were our government figures from a study called the Women's Health Initiative, which came out in 2003. And since then, which people don't remember it, and pharma has tried to say, oh, well, that wasn't, the women were too old, or the demographic was too limited, or they just figure people have forgotten it, and the same risks exist. I believe, as a reporter, it's sexism, because aging is not, the problem with the HRT marketing is don't be old and ugly.
That's
Stay
right.
young, you know.
That's right. Whatever you do, don't do that. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. Well, you wrote, and then in talking about other classifications of using drugs, you wrote that so many of our soldiers are being over-medicated, and then they are becoming insane and killing themselves. I mean, why hasn't the national media discussed this? I mean, I was reading that during the Iraq War and Afghanistan War, and just after those wars, 125 suicides of former active duty servicemen and women were happening every week for a year. And prescription drugs were involved in 1/3 of the suicides taken. I don't recall seeing that on the news.
Thank you, Lois. It was not on the news. It's very underreported, and it continues. The pharmaceutical drug makers have camped out in our military, and that would include TRICARE, which is the insurance company for DOD, Defense Department, and VA. They've camped out. They have their consultants in administrative positions, so they're
just putting our soldiers on these drugs.
Yes.
without much, like it's part of the process of being a soldier, right? You go to war and then you get on a drug, right?
I cannot document this, but I've heard from some good sources that the men and women who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan were allowed to enlist on the drugs, whereas originally if you were on those drugs you couldn't even enlist, and consequently they weren't in their right minds in the battlefield. And the drugs the SSRIs are highly correlated with suicide regardless of what pharma says. And our poor men and women, our veterans, kill themselves on these drugs. They shouldn't be on these drugs.
They should not be on these drugs. It's outrageous. Well, how did Big Pharma cook up the osteoporosis crisis to sell more bone drugs? I mean, should the FDA be limiting the sale of those drugs?
The bisphosphonates were very parallel to the HRT. The idea was don't be old, don't break up, it was all about youth marketing to women who were raised to believe their face and their body were their fortune. The bisphosphonates were marketed by movie stars. They were marketed just like the SSRIs before the side effects were known. They were marketed before we knew that they actually cause and don't prevent fractures.
Oh my gosh.
They should never be prescribed, in my reporting opinion, to anyone.
And that's in your book. And then I never knew egg production could be so cruel. Describe, we're not going to switch to food, big food, egg production, and describe egg farms and health hazards from eggs.
Eggs have been in the news because they've become so expensive.
Yes.
Because of the bird flu, which, in my opinion, having studied this for 25 years, I think that intensive factory farming causes these viruses, such as bird flu, to move,
to expand.
Exactly. But the actual egg production, and a lot of people don't know this, people who eat eggs, is when the eggs come through the assembly line for hatching, females who are going to lay eggs, all males at birth, when they hatch, are killed alive. They're grinded or suffocated at birth. I call it birth. They hatch, and so if you eat an egg, you're supporting that.
Let's discuss animal pharma. The animals we eat are getting tons of drugs. I don't think people know this. Is our meat getting tested for drug traces? If not, why?
I love that question, Lois, because the drug traces, we call them residues, and the FSIS, Food Safety and Inspection Service, which is part of the USDA, Department of Agriculture, does test for residues. However, if you look at their records, and they keep good records, they try really hard, but if you look, we have repeat offenders because nothing happens to them. So there are many drugs that are not supposed to be in our meat, and we find the residues. Sometimes those foods are even sold anyway. But what I always say is that many countries in this world will not take our food. We are eating food that other countries won't take. The prime example is the hormone-treated beef, which Europe won't take. However, some of Asian countries won't take our chicken because they dip the chicken in chlorine to kill all the germs. So they won't take that. So there's many examples of food that we shouldn't be eating, and it's not on the label. I feel if it were on the label, people wouldn't maybe eat it.
Well, are you eating organically then? Are you afraid?
Yes.
You are?
Yes.
Because you just feel like that's the only way you know that the food is clean, right?
I think organic is trustworthy. I do think that it has its loopholes, but it's preferable.
Yes, it is. It is. Well, how can drugs be used to make animals gain weight fast and not have an impact on the national obesity statistics? I mean, how can an asthma drug that causes hyperactivity in animals, as reported by farmers, not cause ADHD problems in children? I mean, what these drugs are ingested by us, aren't they?
Lois, that's a great question because it's underreported, and it's underreported because news stations are very much, their advertisers are food. What you have are two factors that make animals gain weight. If animals gain weight, your farmer's going to make more money, he or she. But one is the antibiotics, which increase weight tremendously. And they are in the residue of the animal. The antibiotics are one way that animals are grown, but the other thing you've mentioned, and we know about antibiotic residues and what it does to the gut, but the other one is called ractopamine. It was an asthma drug, and they discovered that animals would gain a lot of weight on the drug at the price of becoming lame and falling down and losing their feet. And
at this point, animals couldn't even walk to the slaughterhouse because they were so obese, right?
Well, exactly, and they found that the antibiotics and the ractopamine, they're in the manure, of course. They're supposed to be withdrawn at slaughter, but they're not, and they're in the manure. They come up into crops like onion and celery. So if you don't eat meat, which I don't, they're still in the crops.
That's incredible. I don't think people know that. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
people, they don't want you to know it.
No. And now let's discuss the horrific conditions of animals who are trucked to the slaughterhouses in America.
Well, the conditions on the truck are no different than in the slaughterhouse and in the growing facility. Animals are treated like heads of lettuce. There's no conception of pain and suffering. And the irony, Lois, is that people who love their dogs don't realize that that's like a dog, that little pig or that chicken. The conditions, I think, will only come to light if they're very clearly correlated with death of or illness of humans.
Yes.
And so we saw with the bird flu, well, you know, they killed, what, 5 million chickens, but we're also getting sick. So I think when it spills over, and there's a high correlation between unhygienic, crowded conditions of animals and us getting sick.
Yeah,
or the workers. The workers are very abused too.
Exactly. And so it's what's called factory farming, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, how has meat possibly containing the United States' first mad cow sold to 5 California restaurants when the government said it wasn't?
Well, that's in my book, and I urge people to read it. I predict that will happen again. But the mad cow disease, we first saw it in UK, and most sources say that that disease came from giving live cows their dead comrades to eat. In other words, cannibalism.
Oh my gosh, they're eating their dead. Oh gosh.
Right. And I might add that all the chickens that were killed recently for bird flu were given to cows to eat, because big egg is not going to waste that protein, the quote-unquote protein. The mad cow disease was, it resembles dementia, fast-moving dementia, and it is terminal. Okay, and so when we began to see clusters in certain states like Texas, it had everything to do with that farming facility and the meat they were eating, and the government covered it up because the markets crash. If beef is giving you dementia and you're going to die, your markets are going to crash.
That's right. That's right. Certainly. Well, President Trump appointed Robert F. Kennedy Secretary of Health and Human Services, and under Kennedy, this HHS has highlighted pharmaceutical conflicts of interest in medical journals, government agencies, and medicine in general. What does your book say about conflicts of interest in government agencies?
Many of our agencies, which would be FDA, CDC, NIH, which is National Institutes of Health, and of course HHS, are very funded by industry. Industry is mostly pharma, but not just pharma, because you also have...
So big pharma is funding these agencies.
Yes, yes. And once our Bobby Kennedy was named head of HHS, there was a strong backlash about, we'll lose our research, we'll lose our science, we'll lose our... And all that was showing how much we are funded by big pharma.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And then your book exposes the industrial meat, egg, and dairy farming or factory farms, which include dangerous ingredients and poor treatment of animals and farm workers. I mean, do you foresee any changes in U.S. farming from the current administration?
I think we will. Lois, I'm very hopeful that Bobby Kennedy will crack down on GMO crops, fertilizers, herbicides, pollution in the water. We know that those red tides are caused by the herbicides and the herbicides and the pesticides. I do believe the GMO animals, which is a corollary to GMO crops.
So GMO stands for?
Genetically modified organisms.
Okay.
And we know about Roundup Ready soybeans, because that's been around for 20 years. But I think that what Bobby Kennedy will do is stop some of this, it's called Frankenfoods. Frankenfoods, you know?
Yeah, that's what it is, Frankenfoods. That's a good way to put it. I find it interesting that the Health and Human Services Administration, under Secretary Kennedy, is focusing on negative food drug effects in children, from red dye to corn syrup, and he cites growing risk of chronic diseases like obesity, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases, asthma, and addiction. I mean, what can be done to help our children?
He is focusing on those, and I'm very happy to see that there's so many variables and unknowns and factors. But I think one thing we know, the high fructose corn syrup is in everything. It wasn't 20 years ago.
It wasn't, okay.
And so the kids, I've read that it produces a famine-like response in kids or in people that makes them eat when they really aren't, when they're full and they're not hungry. So it makes people fat. The endocrine disruptors, which are a lot of pesticides.
Yes.
They're in the foods, and that could explain some of this gender confusion, because we don't know, like you have frogs in streams where they get those pesticides. They're both men and women, the frogs.
Oh my gosh.
So there's a lot. But one thing I'll say on that is our younger people, not just Gen Z, but even millennial, are getting many, many more cancers than the older ones did.
Right.
And nobody knows why. Well, I think we need to look at our food.
We have to look at our food. You wrote that many agricultural interests and farmers are miffed that it's none of your business farming is now over. And it doesn't help that our farmers are now competing with foreign meat coming into the country. Can you end our discussion on a positive note of how we're going to improve?
Okay, well, yeah, there are some positives. I always say to people there are definitely sources of news on the internet about pure food, organic food, cruelty-free food. So there's many ways that people can get around these problems. I think that what we're seeing is some countries are more advanced and progressive in their treatment of animals than we are, but
yes.
But it is true, it is our business how that animal is treated. And there's a natural conflict between the farmer making money and sometimes how the animal is treated, because it costs more money to treat an animal well. I mean, not to squeeze them together, but I would say the positive note would be, I believe the lab-created beef, which is, they call it, now I can't think of the name, but the lab, there is meat that they cull from the cells of the animal without killing the animal.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's great. The cultivated meat has gotten a very bad rap from ranchers because that's their income,
mm-hmm.
raising and slaughtering animals and grazing them. It has a lot going for it in terms of ecology, because the land is not used up and polluted and the animals don't die. The cultivated meats is safe, and it's, if you like meat, it's just exact same molecularly speaking. But the ranchers have given a bad, they call it fake meat. It's not fake meat, it's slaughter-free meat, and it's, I recommend it.
Okay.
I've eaten it, yeah.
I've never tried it. That's interesting. That's interesting. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on our program, and I would love for you to tell our viewers where they can find your book to purchase it.
Oh, thank you, Lois. So the book is on Amazon and in the bookstores, and it is also a Kindle book if you like to read on the electronic platforms, and it's called Big Food, Big Pharma, Big Lies. And Lois, thank you for your wonderful show. I love it, and I watch your authors, and thank you so much for a great show.
Thank you so much. And thank you for watching. Please join us again next month for a new edition of the Bookman's Corner, and keep reading.